Most academics actually are small businessmen. In some sense, teaching is actually what you see in the front end for most of these profs, but a lot of time that they're spending is actually on the research, and they are pursuing something that they are good at as well as what is they are very passionate about. They have to actually go get funding in order to support their lab and the people in the lab, their students getting stipends for them, and the lab equipment, all of those things.
Hi, Professor Satya. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Really look forward to the chat.
Thanks for asking me to do this.
You have many interests, but before we delve into that, we'd love to start with rapid fire. If you could have dinner with any three historical figures, who would they be and why?
Someone like Gandhi comes to the top of my, maybe Hitler.
Okay. Gandhi, Hitler, and number three. Seems like an interesting group.
No. I don't know if Elon Musk counts for a historical
Okay,
figure.
sure, fair. That's an interesting bunch. What is one question you would ask yourself as a host of this podcast?
Why are we doing this?
Sure. 100%. What was one subject you hated in your BTech?
BTech. Oh,
Yeah.
That's very easy. So the stuff that's actually coming to haunt me, electrical.
Okay. Understand. What's more fun, studying at IIT Madras or teaching at IIT Madras?
Oh, studying for sure. Yeah.
For sure. Why? Sorry, I'm asking the follow up on this one.
Studying is easier. Teaching is not so. It's not
Okay.
as. Yeah.
Understand. Now, these were the more fun ones. We'll ask you some business focused rapid fires. Bootstrapped versus funded.
Funded.
Okay. Why so?
Oh, when you're funded, you have a lot more accountability.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good perspective. Three startups you would invest in today.
DeepTech products that can actually offer a service. That's essentially what I always look like. But other than what I do and maybe Agnikul, I'm not seeing anyone else who is actually following that model yet. So you have only two answers out of three.
Yes, of course. Any other startups that come to mind that you would think are worth investing?
-0, that's doing the autonomous vehicles.
I see. Generalists versus specialists.
There is somebody in between called expert.
Yeah. Nice answer.
On the
spectrum. No, fair. And the final one, what is one truth that you believe in that very few people agree with you on?
That's difficult to answer, not because I don't know the answer, but
right.
I don't speak out what I believe in that people disagree. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. Okay. Fine.
Just to elaborate a little bit on that, although I know it's a rapid fire. Not that I don't want to say things that people don't want to agree and stuff.
Right.
I believe in actually living and doing what I believe rather than say it and all that stuff. That's important. Yeah.
Maybe we can take that as the answer to that question. That's a fair answer also.
Okay. Yeah.
So you became a founder after years of academia, studying and teaching. What was the aha moment that helped you decide to build a business? And if you can talk through a little bit on your journey as well, before you became a founder, I would love to walk through that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I wish this was actually part of the rapid fire as well, because the quick answer to that is I might have been pretty dumb for a long time. I don't know. The reason why I got into academia is because I love teaching. I found that I was doing a fairly good job of explaining things to my friends in the last minute, the previous night before the exams, and the day of the exam, the morning of the exam. So they used to appreciate that, and I thought that actually, yeah, I would probably be a good teacher. So that's what actually took me to academia. In India, for example, I think entrepreneurship actually has blossomed only in the last 10 years, I would say, 10 to 15 years. Deep tech startups actually have been a lot rarer and are probably happening only in the last 5 years, 6 years. Maybe I had the path to or thought process to actually do startups maybe even 10 years before, but I think the mood wasn't there. So there are a lot of these questions: who's going to invest, where can I get the money, and all of these things. So if you think about it, actually, academia is sort of like a bunch of small businessmen. A lot of people don't realize that.
Interesting. Can you
Um,
elaborate on that a little bit?
I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't make these very cryptic remarks and move on. Don't worry about that. So I
I
mean,
think it's a professional hazard for you because you can't make cryptic remarks and
exactly.
move on.
Yeah. This is something that I realized when I was doing my PhD, that most academics actually are small businessmen in some sense. Um, Teaching is actually what you see in the front end for most of these profs, but the lot of time that they're spending is actually on the research, and they are pursuing something that they are good at, as well as what they are very passionate about. And they have to actually go get funding in order to support their lab and the people in the lab, their students getting stipends for them, and the lab equipment, all of those things. So they will have to go, make proposals, go present them, go hobnob with all these funding managers and all those guys. So the scenario is not very different. Like you have investors that you have to actually be going behind in entrepreneurship. That there'll be some bunch of fund managers of different agencies and stuff that you will be going behind. All of the temperament has actually been around. It's not as if like it's not there. And so I have dealt with large sums of money in setting up the combustion center, nothing to take home. So that's about academia, right? Academia, we do things just for some kind of satisfaction. We don't really think about like making money. So we would be wrong. So if you wanted to make money, we would be in the wrong profession if you're choosing academics.
Can you talk about that philosophy a little bit as well? Money versus, and I think it's a broader question, maybe not specific to entrepreneurship, but choosing what interests you and following what they say is your passion versus money.
No,
How do you
I
make
think
that trade off?
yeah. So I mean, I think the quick one word or two word answer to that is comfort zone.
Hmm.
So there is this general belief that I think you can probably talk about all through across cutting across lots of different professions and stuff is the more money you take, the more accountable you get to people who are giving you the money, and
Hmm.
that essentially means that you lose your peace of mind, and you're now asked and herded to do things rather than you having the freedom to do what you want.
Right.
And academics actually value a lot of that. I mean, academic freedom is something that they really hold very close to their heart. So they can't, for example, in my view, academic administrator is an oxymoron because you have all these deans and all these people, right? They just can't administer uh, the professors. They're
Right.
just enablers, right?
Right.
Uh, so an institution is essentially a bunch of individual academics that are holding it up like pillars, and they are on their own. They are just doing what they want, and that's something that they value more than money. The moment I
Hmm.
have to take money month on month from somebody or year on year from somebody, show valuation increases or whatever it is, right? I'm stuck. That's something that they don't want to do. That's the biggest difference. Yeah. So
Fascinating.
the point is, still, money is something that's kind of lubricating all our lives.
Hmm.
So academics still do need money to run a lab,
Right.
get students, support them, go to conferences, and spend money to get the next big money,
Hmm.
the next pot of money, and all that stuff, and so on.
No,
So
makes sense.
right, so
Absolutely.
we have been doing that. So I've had this National Center for Combustion R&D that I established with lots of money. We did some very big. We still have them, right? So you can actually come and see for yourself. So we're one of the world's largest combustion research centers, and so we have like very good, very very large engineering marvels like a microgravity drop tower, supersonic
Right.
combustion brake, and all those things. So those things actually sort of empowered my mind to think and do big things. So it's okay to actually think about making rockets. It's okay to start thinking about making planes, right, and so on. The question basically is who gives the money
Right.
for doing that, and that's when the scenario in the country was changing more towards entrepreneurship, and we have these VCs and so on. Yeah, so I think the time was right for me to do what I was doing.
Understand. And I think given your technical background, you're a bit of an exception amongst entrepreneurs. What advantage does that give you as a founder?
Well, I mean, the quick thing is you have a much wider perspective about life.
Hmm.
Right? You're not thinking only one particular way
Right.
that people are used to thinking in their profession. Because I've done another profession before I got into this and stuff. So that's one. And then as you grow older, you have better perspective. I mean, I shouldn't say better, larger perspectives. Let's say not necessarily better, or right about things. So all of those things come together. I mean, there is no way I could have actually been a prof and an entrepreneur and under 25 all together, right? So
Right. Hmm.
yeah.
Makes
So
sense.
yeah.
And you also, apart from running ePlane, you advise and invest in other deep tech startups only. Does that help?
Yeah, of course. There is a huge amount of cross pollination of thought process, as well as even sometimes combining strengths across them and so on. I mean, I wish we could actually cooperate a lot more, but I also want to see this as an experiment where there are some 6 independent teams that are, doing pretty much the same thing again and again. Let's say, and then we want to see like who does it more efficiently and who does it better and all that stuff instead of straitjacketing everyone. So I don't really interfere with any of the companies day to day running at all because we have their own co-founders running the job full time. So lots of decisions like what software they use and all those things.
So now let's dive into your journey into entrepreneurship. How and when did you decide to build something in the space, and maybe start off with what exactly does ePlane do, and how is it different than a current day helicopter for our listeners?
ePlane is essentially trying to build a electric air taxi. That's what we are after. This is an electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Right now, we are actually targeting a two-seater, one pilot and a passenger, and because we want to make the most compact eVTOL in the world that could potentially land on your rooftops and pick you up from where you are and take you to where you want to go. Instead of you having to go to a separate vertiport and then another journey from the destination vertiport to your actual destination. So we want to try to cut out all of that stuff and see how best we can fly.
So that's the difference. It's being able to land in a much smaller space than a
And
traditional.
being electric is actually a lot more affordable when compared to a helicopter, and a lot safer, much less noisier. So these are the differences that eVTOLs bring to the table when compared to a helicopter. Helicopters are fairly unaffordable, very very complex machines. Maintenance is very huge. There are severe restrictions for helicopter operations and all those things. Uh, yeah, because they have like only one single rotor, and if that fails, then they will drop down like a rock and so on. So they're not very safe machines in general. Helicopters have had their huge share of pretty poor safety record. Yeah. So I think we hate to actually compare ourselves with helicopters first of all for that reason, right?
Yeah.
So we are a winged bird. So once we take off as quickly as possible, as short a vertical stint as possible, we want to actually fly forward like a regular plane. And regular
Okay.
planes are a lot safer. I mean, inherently they are safer.
Super.
They are stable. So that there's a concept of stability, right? About this pendulum and all those things. Like you disturb it and then it comes back to the original position. That as basic as that. You disturb a plane, it'll actually come back to its original position. So not naturally, it's a stable equilibrium. So those are things that are super important for passengers to move around.
Thank you for that overview, and we'll dive into it in a lot more detail. But walk us through that trigger to kind of take this entrepreneurial journey.
What made me do ePlane is actually one question. What made me get into an entrepreneurial journey is they're slightly different questions.
Okay.
I could have tried to do an ePlane as a prof, for example. Right? So,
Ah,
and you
I see.
probably wouldn't have heard about me at all. I don't know.
Right.
So yeah, I think I was not really planning on doing entrepreneurial stuff initially, right? So when we were done with the combustion center setting up by about 2016, we had the first thing that actually happened was Aerospace. That's the other company that does micro gas turbines with us at the combustion center. And so one of the founders walked up to me and said that he wanted to do a micro gas turbine, and I said, okay, I can support you. I can tell, I can be with you, do what you want, and all those things. So I was more like an advisor, definitely, and that's what I continue to be. Uh, then I think in about a year's time from then, so for about a year or so, they were just ideating, and I think I should give myself some brownie points. Like fundamentally, I'm a very commonsensical guy, so I ask these questions like, who cares about this? Who pays for it? What's the market? Right? What's the market size? Where is the market? How do you find the customer? So these are things that a typical academic will not even bother about. And until
Right.
that point, when that guy actually walked into my room, I wouldn't have bothered. Right? We just do what we do. Whereas on that day and from then on for the next year, our at least the question that I was, badgering them with is find out the market. Don't get into something without knowing where it's going to go. Right?
Who's going to pay for
Where,
it? Yeah.
I mean, this is very important, right? Where is every entrepreneurship going to go is towards the market. And
That's so true. Yeah.
I mean, maybe
Absolutely.
you just wanted to rewind back and then take that sentence and frame it and say this is like the golden words of, you know, right?
Yes.
So unless, I mean, it's very important. So unless we understand where we are going to go, don't start. That's the basic idea. And so that means you need to have a fairly good understanding of the market. At least you need to have the hypothesis, and then you have to see what is the soonest opportunity for you to test your hypothesis, get validation on your hypothesis. Then comes Agnikul. So Agnikul guys actually showed up from pretty much nowhere, and just said that they wanted to make rockets, and I'm like, oh sure, well, let's do rockets. And I mean that's one of those things that really excites me. I mean, somebody comes and tells me we want to do rockets, and then I just say, yeah, let's do rockets, right? So how many guys on earth have that situation presented to them?
Yes. No, exactly.
Right? So those are things that I would just grab and then say, hey, let's do rockets. I had no idea who they were, what they were. These are things that I don't really care about. I'm like, if something sounds right, I will not bother about the antecedents of those people and so on. And much later, I had to listen to hour-long podcasts of my co-founders at Agnikul to find out what their backgrounds were, because the podcast guys asked them like, where are you from and what did you do and all those things. I had no idea. For example, Srinath was actually a Wall Street trader, right? I didn't know that he was actually into film script writing.
Yeah, we learned a lot about it.
I had no idea.
You did too.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
I mean, but none of those things would have mattered to me. That's the point.
Yeah.
And even in hindsight, so even then, I was actually asking. So I was not in the case of rockets, and this is very interesting. Even today, most investors in rockets don't ask the question, "Who are your customers?" By the way,
Yeah.
what's your market size? Nothing, right? Rockets are like so sexy that they just want to put money, and so everybody wants to just make a rocket. I'm like, okay, what do you do with it? Right, so the questions that I was asking the microgas turbine guys just about the last year, I was not asking these guys. It's like it's so commonsensical that we can do rockets, right? So and somebody will give us money.
And that's what happened.
Right?
Yes.
So that's how I was getting in. I was still in a very safe zone.
Yeah, but still as an advisor at this
Still,
point.
still even today an advisor, right?
Yeah.
Right, and I think to some extent later on when Aerospace and Agnikul matured, I was getting into the tech part. I was getting deeper into the combustor design in the case of Aerospace, the rocket engine design in the case of Agnikul. I've spent like a lot of time in 2018, for example, with Aerospace and much more with Agnikul because it was very passionate. I was very passionate about it.
And that's where the flexibility of being a professor comes in as well, right?
So if I had actually continued to just do those and then maybe take up more of those kinds of things, I would have been continuing to be a professor, right? I would teach and I would do research and all those things, but I also advise these companies and so on. But then that's when the entrepreneurship bug bit me, and I said, well, if people that are half my age are actually making engines and rockets,
right.
why is it not possible for me to make planes? I mean, I could.
People who are not even rocket scientists.
Right. And the point is, I think by now, I think Agnikul was definitely something that a lot of people looked up to, and they still do. It's very hugely popular around the world. So suddenly a lot of people actually started looking up and saying, hey, this is a prof, this is actually doing all these things. So they would actually ask me what it is to do, and so on. And I was still learning entrepreneurship. I was still not clued in into it, right? So I felt that if I have to actually talk sensibly about something, it's important for me to go through the journey myself, and from an idea to a product, into a market. So I did a market. That's not even right. So all the way to the market. So I need to go through like at least one cycle of a startup journey myself before I can go out and tell the world what we need to do, right? Otherwise, what I would say would ring hollow, right? So and it would be just like what a prof says, right? So I wanted to be a lot more authentic about that, and that's one of those reasons why I thought I'll actually get into ePlane. But why ePlane and why eVTOLs is actually another interesting, um, little bit of detail there. So
Yeah, would love to hear more. I mean, you obviously at this point had a lot of people reaching out to you, and you had to pick kind of where you wanted to go, right? So how
correct. So
did you?
even as Aerostruvelos was just beginning to happen from about June of 2016, October of 2016 is when I hit upon this video by Tony Seba that was saying that in another 13, 14 years, all cars will become electric, and all of that power for the electric will come from solar. And here I was just about setting up the combustion center with automobile combustion, thermal power, as well as aerospace propulsion being the three major pillars that we wanted to work on. And two of those three pillars were getting knocked off without the prediction. I had begun to actually see many combustion conferences around the world with speakers coming and sort of mouthing words of denial about a change that's going to come in against combustion, and they would say that we will prevail and we will combustion is the will keep happening and so on. But when they say all these things, it means that they are being threatened. And so I don't want to live that life of denial for long. So I felt that I need to actually do, be the change that you want to see. And I'm basically an aerospace engineering major, right? So, and combustion happens to be what we use in engines that propel planes, and rockets. Whereas what I'm supposed to do is to actually figure out what is the next big thing that will happen in propulsion for aerospace. What's going to pull planes forward, right? And that doesn't have to necessarily involve burning anything, right? If there is electric power that can do this, yeah, sure, why not? So why is it not possible for me to look at the next big form of propulsion for in aircraft? And that's what a prof is supposed to do, right? I mean, as I'm speaking, I'm still being this very classical prof, right? Like deep rooted prof, right? A prof is supposed to actually think about what will happen 10, 20 years down the line, and then start doing research on it so that he can develop the technology that is adopted by the industry. This is what we are supposed to do, right? So if electric propulsion is what is going to happen to aircraft in 10 years, we should be doing that right now. That's what my attitude was. So as a very typical prof, so one characteristic about me is that if I think about something deeply, I take it super seriously, and I'm like, let me do this, and that's it, right? So I started doing research on electric propulsion, and the reason why I was doing research was I wanted to actually be in conferences to learn what was going on, and it's a bit more what do you call scholarly or prestigious to be in a position to publish or present a paper in a conference so that people also take you seriously, as well as so you can go and talk to them, and then listen to, and it's very important to be part of a community that's kind of growing in this area, right? So that means that you have to do some contribution for other people to take you seriously and let you be part of the community. So I wanted to actually now target annual conferences to go and be there and see what people are doing and so on. So I started doing some research so that I would be able to present those papers and so on. And the next thing that profs a serious prof does is, if he wants to learn a subject that he doesn't know, he actually boldly steps out to teach it. Uh, we clearly are using students as guinea pigs, and the students don't mind, because if you think about it, the whole world is all about learning, right? So everybody wants to learn. So it's okay if the prof is also learning as he's teaching, so that the students can learn along. And those are all the kinds of things that we see in IIT. IIT don't People don't care about ignorance, right? It's okay to be ignorant. We can actually explore, not a problem. So I'm actually the first guy in the world, to the extent I know, and probably still the only guy. I've not heard of anybody doing anything better. To have formulated an entire semester long course on electric aircraft propulsion and teach it. And I did this in 2 semesters in 2019. Right. And but then interestingly, I didn't know that I was actually going to give up teaching, at least temporarily, as I'm going through now, by the end of that year. Mainly because I was still thinking that electric planes will be a startup where I might actually just be an advisor, right? We'll find co-founders and let the co-founders run the show. I could just be an advisor, was the original thinking. I didn't really think about jumping
And
into
you're
entrepreneurship full time.
and you're taking this academic approach to the whole thing as well, right? Learning about it and then
Correct.
teaching it.
So
Yeah.
then comes the next story, right? So we start thinking about, okay, what are these electric planes good for, right? I mean, can we? So there is, first of all, there is a lot of research happens at more like a scientific level, even though it's engineering. So we call it engineering science at the level of research, more like it's an applied science. And then there is technology, right? So for example, um, electric propulsion could be just considered like a technology. And then we have to now have a product, which means that it has to be applied to a plane, and you need to now be able to define what will be the plane, and then you now have to use that, and then you have to find a product market for that product. So you have to jump from science to technology, technology to a product to a market. This is actually the path for DeepTech. And you have to think through all of these things ahead of time to figure out, like, where is the market, what is the product it needs, and what is the technology required for it, and what the science we have to do for it. If I can actually figure that out backwards, I'm a,
But that's actually, I mean, you make it sound easy, but that's really hard to do because for most entrepreneurs, you have a market right now and then you build a product for that market. But here you have to anticipate where the market's going to go and kind of meet them with
I mean,
your technology.
that's not too difficult. I'll just dial back to that particular point. Just to anchor, throw an anchor there. Entrepreneurship is all about problem solving. So problems remain today, and all we have to do is, okay, fine. If I'm going to make a product and it's going to actually enter the market in about 5 years from now, you have to ask the question: is this problem going to persist in 5 years, or is it going to get worse, or is it going to actually get better? Right? And we were basically solving the traffic problem, and traffic is only getting worse. So that's a good thing to do, right? So it's important for us to actually sense that market and come backwards to work out the science behind it and all those things. That's what I could configure. The thing is, so if you just look at electric planes, the best thing to do for in electric planes is the conventional planes that take off from a runway, right? And of course, you could start with a two-seater. Let's say you make a two-seater that will start off from a runway, or one-seat, single-seater, right? Forget it. You want to just make a plane to just show that. So if I were just continuing to be an academic and trying to make electric planes, I would have tried to get some government funding or something like that, right? Or some CSR money from some corporate or something, just to say that we are also doing electric planes, right? And we are developing the technology, and we want to test out the technology in a flight, and therefore we are making a plane. So those things will not even scratch the surface, right? You'll probably find it mentioned in some corner of a newspaper or something, right? Because the reporter didn't have anything better that day and stuff. But here we are actually saying, okay, fine, if I have to do this plane, where will it go and how far will it go? And that's where the problem was. So we found that current day batteries do not really take an electric plane too far. The range is very hugely limited. And what are the alternatives? You can actually do a hybrid plane, but that's probably more complicated than either an electric plane or a engine plane because they're trying to put both of them. So it doesn't make sense at all to do something that's as complicated as that, because the charm of doing electric would be lost. The idea of doing electric was you can bring down the cost of the plane in the first place, because the number of parts is very less, and the architecture is extremely simple, right? The second thing is maintenance is so less, because the number of parts itself is less, and the number of moving parts is extremely less. and the third is electricity is much cheaper than fuel, and therefore, if you're targeting the capital cost, the maintenance cost, and the operating cost, all three, you can simply disrupt that entire industry completely. So the idea basically is that, let's say, for example, you two guys were billionaires who were betting on me and gave me like about $1 billion right away. Okay, I will not even bother about doing what I'm doing. I will simply say, hey, let's just go ahead and make that Boeing 737 electric. Okay. The question is, how far will it go? It won't go too far, right? It will probably not even go from Chennai to Bangalore. And right, and for that reason, even if you had $1 billion, you wouldn't give me, right? So then you have to actually start thinking, okay, fine, I don't have a product that will actually work, right, according to current day, requirements. That's when I think around 2018, I read this other book called The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen, which was very useful. In fact, it's kind of become like a Bible for me because Clayton Christensen actually makes a very important point that every new disruptive technology will actually start being inferior to existing technology. And the inferiority here is actually the range, the distance you could cover. And for that reason, the people who are adopting this new technology will not be the people who are currently doing the existing technology. They'll be completely newcomers that get into this, and they will also explore new markets. So for this reason, we have to now make something called an eVTOL, a vertical takeoff and landing, which is a big pain because we are always trying to beat gravity taking off vertically. And in fact, we are trying to fight against gravity so that we are not falling in a thud. So you have to actually gently come down. So you're guzzling a lot of power in trying to take off vertically and trying to land vertically. And then your range is even more limited because you have only so much capacity for carrying battery on board, right? So you're kind of killing yourself on the range. So question is, if the range is going to come down significantly, where are you going to fly? And that's when city travel comes into picture, right? So in cities, we don't really travel too far, but we take far too long, and that's inappropriate. That's actually disproportionate, right? So is there a way by which we can beat that? And that's a completely new market to enter in order to be in a position to disrupt aviation significantly.
Understand. How far ahead is ePlane in its journey, and when do you think it crosses taxis on the road? What's your estimate?
We are not even targeting that at all.
Okay.
At the moment, our initial target is about 10% of the taxi market.
Okay.
So just give you numbers, right? So my sense is that there are probably about something like 12,000 vehicles on the road, like taxis,
Okay.
in a typical city like a Chennai or a Bangalore. Or
Right.
maybe Bangalore may have a little bit more when compared to Chennai. And so forth.
Right.
And they are doing maybe about 6 to 7 trips, maximum 10 trips, depending upon how short or long they are per day, because you get stuck in traffic congestion. For each trip takes about 1.5 hours in a place like Bangalore.
Right.
And then the guy probably drives for about 10 hours or maybe even 12 hours a day. Right? So you
Right.
don't really do more than about 8 trips back max.
Right.
So that's probably about like little less than about 1 lakh trips, maybe about 85,000,
Correct.
80,000 kind of trips, taxi
Right.
trips happening. If I were to put 20 planes in the city, right, and each of them is possibly going to do close to about 40 trips a day, right? I'm right away doing what 40 into 20, about 800 trips, right? So 800 trips when compared to 80,000 is just 1%, right? For me to become like 10%, I will have to put 200 planes. And by the time we are talking 200 planes, a lot of people start shuddering. They're like, oh my God, the sky is going to be crowded. Okay. And that's the next thing that we will have to manage. And we have answers for it. We'll have to just figure out how to implement it and go through the implementation, see what happens far long before even one plane takes off.
Right.
Okay. So all of that stuff is expected to happen in the next year.
In the next year.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, man, I'm a I'm an entrepreneur. If I don't talk something that's going to happen the next year, no VC will. And
Yeah, no,
that's fair. I mean, that's fair. It's nothing wrong with the VCs. That's how
no,
the game is.
absolutely.
Always figure out what needs to be done in the next year. Next 18 months is actually the window.
Right. No, makes sense.
And as the number of ePlanes start growing, we're also going to see an ecosystem of auxiliary services, right? Like batteries, drones, ePlanes, service startups and stuff. Uh, what do you think are some opportunities that are exciting for aspiring entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, we are already kind of warming up to those things, by the way. And then we are looking at partnering with people and so on. Like, for example, the landing sites. Right. So, where are these things going to land? And we want to say that they will land on the rooftops. And the question is like, whose rooftops? And so basically, for example, let's say you're living in an apartment, and your apartment association, or what you call a society, wants this to actually happen over the rooftop, right? Because it makes your life very accessible. Like you can go and start flying and all that stuff. So on the one hand, it's you want this, but the second thing, you start actually smacking your lips and say, hey, wait, is it possible for me to actually charge a rental? Right.
Right, so it becomes
The third problem that you ask is like, is it only my association guys will have to actually land here, or can I allow for this to be used kind of like a public place that they will then start using my lift from the terrace to the ground floor, and then they will start walking out or walking in and all those things, right? So question is, what are the kind of conveniences and inconvenience that it's going to pose? And is there kind of like an entrepreneurship ecosystem for somebody to start aggregating these and maintaining them, and calming down people who are going up and down the lifts, and
yeah,
and so on. I don't know how to incentivize them. I don't know how. And then people abroad talk about these kinds of things, like we will set up vertiports, and these vertiports will have lounges, and the lounges will have cafes. They'll have a shopping experience. I was recently in Singapore, and I was asking those guys when I was giving my talk, right? I'm like, I mean, the reason why you're actually taking plane is because you don't have time. So why would you want to actually do
why would you like
shopping during in vertiport of all places, right? So,
yeah,
but then like I can actually position a vertiport or a landing spaces on the rooftop of a mall, for example, right? So you actually do shopping and then pick up the plane, or you fly down to the mall and then start doing shopping. All that stuff is fair. So what is that ecosystem, where we are going to land, what's going to happen to the landing space, who's going to maintain that landing space? There'll be some regulations around it, for like shining lights, keeping a fire extinguisher. There must be some guy who actually is out there, whatever it is, right? So that is one. The charging infrastructure is something very big that's going to happen,
yeah.
and so on. And then there is a app that we'll have to have. You have to actually hail a ride, right? That will come to you, and lots of such things. I mean, it's going to become very big, I would think. And the entire UI UX experience that you're going to have trying to get this and so on. How do you discipline people on board so that they are not actually going to mess with the controls? Right, or listen to the captain for fastening the seat belts.
Right, because there's no one there. Yeah,
And why do you think hardware startups have picked up in the last, say, 5 years? Is there any underlying trend that you are seeing? What's your sense on why this is happening?
I can actually try to highlight that this is probably happening more in India than most of the places, to be honest with you, right? So
Okay.
Silicon Valley, for all the glory about it, I'm not really seeing a lot of hardware startups come out of there, to be honest, right? And then
Understand.
that's not what they are good for, right? And maybe a lot of the Bangalore startups were like Silicon Valley startups, but now you can see a lot of hardware startups happening out there, particularly as well, right? And so on. Why is that? I think the answer is Indians generally kind of go to engineering colleges without thinking about it,
Right.
right?
Right.
But while they are there is when they are actually starting to think about their lives, and they are like, wow, I'm kind of like finding myself here. Can I make use of it? Can I make sense out of it? And I don't think they are actually learning a lot of engineering in their classrooms. They are probably picking up a lot of engineering sense, working on projects, competitions, and all those things with each other. And Indians, for maybe about 200, 300 years, I'm just kind of like diving deep into history very randomly, have been glorified to become like more textbookish guys rather than people working with hands. Whereas that's actually not our culture at all, right? We've seen lots of marvelous temples and whatever it is that we have seen through history, done with hands, right? Like a lot of handicraft and so on. So I think all of that stuff is kind of pent up, in my view, right? And people want to build stuff out here, and I think that's the culture that we have. We need to recognize that, we have to acknowledge it. We have to dive deep into it to figure that out. The moment we actually figure out that very pointedly, I think that can kind of spawn a revolution, saying, "Yeah, this is what we are all about. Let's go do it."
On that note of getting more people involved, I think one question is, why aren't more PhDs and research students involved in building deep tech companies, especially, or companies in general? Do you think there's a disconnect between academia and industry? And
my sense is that a lot of students who actually come and do PhD, their demographics is such that they want more job security, and that's what it is. And many times people actually step into PhD without knowing why they're doing it. That's another thing, very similar to why you're even engineering in the first place. So that kind of thing continues on. So at that stage, I think they want job security. So entrepreneurship is not really the cup of tea. But when you're right out of college, or maybe you have actually seen the industry and found some of the mainstream industry is so boring and so on, you still want to actually be taking some risk in your life. It's all about that. But basically, if you have a very good idea, for example, we have this company out of IIT Madras called TAN90. The founders are all PhDs, and they are using their PhD knowledge in order to develop these cold storage solutions. Fantastic, based on phase change materials, right?
But it's also like a perception thing of people who opt in to do a PhD are looking for jobs, like you said, which is
right. So it's a combination of both.
Yeah, and congrats on the recent civil aviation approval. Was curious about India and the government and the support that you've received. How does India compare to other countries in terms of government support for these kind of initiatives? And what do you think we could do better as a country?
No, I think it's safe to say that we are figuring this out. Not we as in ePlane, the government also. Right, it's all new to the entire ecosystem, and for that reason, I think it's very refreshing all over. The government people are really warming up to this, and they want to do this ahead of everybody else. They are now suddenly waking up to this and saying, "Hey, wait a minute! It looks like there are other people doing this, and then we have their homegrown guys who are doing this, right? Let's actually support these guys and see how we can get them to do this faster." Which essentially kind of throws the burden on us to keep up.
Yeah, now you need to deliver, right?
Yeah, because
everyone's waiting.
After this. But it's also important that we have to figure out what should be the regulations and how to learn the regulations that are being developed abroad and adapt it rather, and so on, and how to hold on to regulations that are of international standards. These are all super important. I think it's a journey that we have to go walk along with the government very carefully, and they are extremely up for it. They are very. I mean, it's very very pleasant experience for us to work with them, to be honest with you.
Understand. And just talking about government institutions, IIT Madras has been pivotal, I would say, in your journey, given you were a student there and a professor, and then you were incubated as well. How important do you think is this in shaping country startups, specifically like institutions like the IITs? What are they doing, and what can they do better, in your opinion?
Students learn a lot more outside of classroom than in the classroom, and this culture is actually now also brought into the curriculum. So, for example, IIT Madras, if you look at a typical BTech curriculum, only 40% of the credits are actually based on classroom teaching. The remaining 60% are for, and in these classroom teaching, there is a lot of project-based evaluation or assignments-based evaluation, which are all done outside the classroom and are away from fixed time duration exams, for example, proctored exams and stuff.
No, that's awesome, and I agree. And just like taking a crystal ball and looking in the future, let's say we're 10 years from now, say 2035. What do you think mobility looks like?
Hyperloop is something that I'm actually very passionate about. And the first time I actually heard Bill Gates is saying that people over predict what will happen in 2 years, under predict what will happen.
Yes, correct.
I just didn't understand that at the time, but I think he's spot on.
Yes.
So I think 12 years is like a long time. Now, of course, in the information communication technologies, a lot of things
Mhm.
happen in very short time,
Right.
uh, right? But in hardware spaces like mobility and all that stuff, it may take time, is what people would be a little bit more cautious about. But we have a plan. If it actually works out, we can get Hyperloop done in 12 years,
Understand.
definitely. And we should actually be long into urban air mobility by then, is my conviction. We expect maybe, if not 2025, 2026, 27, definitely well before 2030, right? We should actually be doing electric taxis.
Hmm.
That's not something that I have too much of a doubt in my mind at all. And during this time is when we should actually be perfecting the Hyperloop and then trying to lay Hyperloop lines, so that by 2035 we are operating them.
Awesome. And just to close, and why we call this Founders Unfiltered, what's one piece of unfiltered feedback you had received as a founder that really stayed with you and changed your perspective?
Even if you're actually looking at like a deep tech entrepreneurship, always try to go to customers as much as possible,
Hmm.
and try to get revenues. So that's a difficult craft to do, but that's an unfiltered advice that I got very recently.
Right.
Right, and it's been very interesting, right? Because we started doing some drones to begin with, and then we sort of pivoted to do planes, because at that time drones were not what do you call regulated,
Right.
and then the drones have actually got regulated. But we pivoted to planes because helicopters exist, and we were basically saying, I'm going to make a superior helicopter so people can understand that regulations are there, and we just had to
Right.
make a machine, an electric machine. And then we were kind of stuck with that narrative, uh, saying that's what my investors wanted. My investors wanted me to make planes, so why would I bother about going back to drones? And then
Right.
question is like, if I did that, would I be considered like a drone company versus a plane company? Because there are some investors who would say like, why am I investing into a drone company, or am I interested? These are, you know. But ultimately, I think an entrepreneur is all about making a product and taking it to a customer and getting revenues. That
Right.
is that fundamental does not change, and you
Makes
can
sense.
dress it up with whichever way you want, and you can probably be, good at how to dress this up, how to position it, branding, right? Have different names, different people, different logos, different websites, whatever it is. We can figure that out. But are you getting money?
Understand.
I think that's the
Oh,
bottom line.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Satya, for your time. We thoroughly enjoyed the chat, and I'm sure a lot of people will be inspired by what you and ePlane are building.
Thanks so much.